Welcome to the Cold Steel Surgical Podcast with your hosts Amir Farouk and Chad Ball.
In many philosophical and religious traditions, there is an emphasis on how intentionality is one of the fundamental tenets of being able to live a fulfilling life. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." One surgeon who is trying to restore that intentionality back to the culture of surgery is Dr. Sharon Stein. Dr. Stein is a colorectal surgeon who has been at the pinnacle of academic surgery and has been, among many other things, the past president of the Association of Women Surgeons, chair of American College of Surgeons Women in Surgery Committee, and on the executive council of the American Society of Colorectal Surgeons. Recently, Dr. Stein started the Intentional Surgeon podcast, dedicated to helping surgeons rediscover their purpose. We had a powerful discussion on a whole myriad of topics, with the through line being how we can try to restore intentionality and purpose to everything that we do.
Dr. Stein, thank you so much for joining us on the Cold Steel podcast. It's really an honor to have someone like you join us on the show, and doubly a pleasure to have a colorectal surgeon also join us on the show, and thirdly, a pleasure to have a fellow podcaster. So on multiple ways, just delighted to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I love your podcast.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And likewise, we've really been enjoying listening to the Intentional Surgeon, and we'll get to it. And I really want to delve deep onto that. But I think it's important for the few people who may not know you to learn a little bit about you. You know, you've had this incredible career, both as a trainee and as a faculty. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and where you did your training?
My path has been amazingly circuitous, which is really funny for someone who now likes intentionality. So I grew up in New York, right outside New York City, and I was never going to be a physician, never going to be a doctor at all. In fact, I came from a family with two physician parents. And my younger sister, who some of you may know, Deborah Stein, a trauma surgeon, was always going to be the surgeon in the family. And that was always going to be happening. So I went off and did all these other things. And it wasn't until about 7 years after college that I decided I wanted to go back to school. And to everybody's surprise, I wanted to come back to school and become a doctor. I did a bunch of prerequisites I needed to get from University of Colorado and my medical school, University of Colorado, then to Mass General for my residency, and to Cornell and Columbia with a little time at Memorial for my fellowship. Was on staff there for about a year and a half, and then moved to Cleveland because my now husband came for his training in surgery here. So I've been here about 15 years.
What a fabulous route. And so what were you doing for that 7 years after college? What were you pursuing at that time?
Oh, a really serious thing. So I was a ski instructor for people with disabilities and for kids. I was a backpacking instructor. I cooked at restaurants. I did real estate. I think those were the big ones. So it had a lot of different hats.
Huh. If it's not too personal a question, what was it that made you decide to go back after 7 years? It's not easy to go back to school sort of once you're out and start working.
Yeah, I think what happened was that I was doing lots of different things, and my goal had always been to make a difference in the world, to do something that really mattered. And at a certain point, I felt like I didn't necessarily have the skills to make that kind of difference, which now going back, I think everybody has the skills to make a difference. It's just how and where you want to make a difference. But for me, working with people with disabilities, I really saw how medicine and the role medicine had played in kind of changing their perspective. I remember working with this young woman, she was actually a high schooler, who was in a car accident and had used to be a track star. And she was paralyzed from the waist down. And I taught her how to monoski. So that's a skiing when you're paralyzed in a chair and be able to go down the hill. And I remembered her talking about the people who made a difference, who believed in her through that process, not just that she was going to survive her injury, but that she could thrive despite her injury. And I wanted to be someone who could help people through those types of times. Initially, I thought about physical therapy, and then some very wise person told me I wasn't going to be happy unless I was the boss, and that I should go back and do medicine, and thought I was going to be a pediatrician, and did not like working with pediatric patients and their parents. And surgery, because I'm such a doer, just seemed like a really good fit.
Well, it's such a beautiful story. And you can sort of see some of the seeds of what you're doing today, I think, in those early stories of like, you know, figuring out how to support people through their most difficult times and not only just survive, but thrive. I love that phrase.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm back to like experiential education, right? Like that's what I was doing as a backpacking instructor and everything. I was like teaching people like, ropes courses and teamwork and things. And I'm right back to where I was. You're right. I see you can lead from anywhere. I just didn't know that I had the skills.
It's kind of beautiful to think that like every experience that you have in your life somehow, in some funny way, if it's done with enthusiasm and energy, comes back and helps you in some way. That's a really beautiful kind of thought. You were also a program director, both for general surgery trainees as well as colorectal surgery fellows or colorectal surgery residents. How do you think that experience has shaped you?
I was associate program director for general surgery, never a program director for general surgery. One of the things I love about trainees is they challenge all of our thoughts, right? They just are able to ask questions that sometimes we're even afraid to ask. And they just make you stay on your toes and they make you think about things. I think our trainees are our most precious resource, and they are truly the future of what our specialty can become. I love mentoring. I love helping people along in that pathway and helping them figure out things. And one of the things, and I think this goes back to really professional development, is that learners don't all learn in the same way. And we have created a model of learning in surgery where we think there's one way to kind of go on and to do things. And I think there are lots of different ways that we can learn and we could accomplish the same thing. I think it's being a resident advocate and being there for residents has been a huge piece of my growth and kind of my interest in professional development.
Can you expound upon that a little bit? Like, what do you mean that we've created a path that doesn't work for everyone or is restrictive in terms of the way that we help people learn?
Okay, so you're going to get me on a little bit of my soapbox right away. So I think there are three things we need to do in surgery. One, we need to be excellent technicians. We need to really be able to do the technical aspects of surgery, right? Two, we need to be excellent clinicians. And we need to be able to understand when people need what type of surgery and what the right thing for them is and recognize complications, the pathology, the physiology. We need to be that. Those two, I think we do sometimes a reasonable job of. The third piece that I think is so vital to our success is being able to communicate with other people, right? We do nothing in professional development. There is no formal curriculum for in medical schools and residencies for any sort of professional development. And when you think about that, you think about communication, you start thinking more about learning styles. I'm an experiential learner. I learn by putting my hands in, doing things, and that is what creates the memory for me. I'm not really good at quoting statistics. If you ask me to come on here and quote you like what the cost trial, like what year it came out and blah, blah, blah. Like I know the gist, but it's when I truly understand something and it can embody something that I can talk about it. And for me, like in speaking to my patients, it was always about the analogies, and those types of things. Other people are really factual learners, right? They need the data. They need all the statistics to be able to have things make sense. And other people are like auditory learners and visual learners. So our style has always been this mentorship, apprenticeship type of style, right? I mean, if you go back to the beginning of surgical training, that's the only way that we teach things. And particularly in this day and age, when we have so much ability between, technology and virtual reality, is that the most effective way to make excellent clinicians, excellent technicians, and excellent communicators? I think we're kind of missing the boat on what we could be doing.
Just before we really delve into the sort of the podcast and the impetus around that, I note that you worked with MSF in South Sudan and in Haiti. What did you learn from that experience? How did you get into that? Especially, I would say it's a little bit more unusual for a colorectal surgeon as opposed to, let's say, a trauma surgeon to get involved with MSF. So how did that sort of experience come about?
Well, the more you know about me, the more you'll know that I just don't mind unusual and change and different, right? Like those are not things that scare me or frighten me. So going back to kind of when you asked how I went into medicine, I had always wanted to make a difference. And I had the gift of traveling a lot when I was very young. And I really wanted to go back and live in different places and actually be a part of something in a way that I could contribute to those places. That had been a dream from like when I was really young. And so by applying to and getting to work with MSF, I had the opportunity to do that because I wasn't just going in and being a tourist in a space, I was actually contributing to the society. So I applied right after fellowship and was able to I worked in, it was at that point, Southern Sudan. It wasn't yet South Sudan, and their basketball team just did terrific. So I was excited about that. But I was the only surgeon for my branch of Doctors Without Borders. And so right out of training, doctors I didn't know from the other stations were like calling me up and saying, do we need to transfer somebody into you on a satellite phone? And I had to figure out whether or not I could make a difference. And each of those phone calls seems like, okay, well, yeah, just bring them in and we'll take a look. But that was like $2,000 out of the actual budget for South Sudan. So that was out of malaria programs or out of HIV prevention programs or whatever it was that else we could do. We were taking money out. So it was a crazy experience. And I remember at that point, internet and email was still just difficult there. It was satellite phone. And I would send an email to one of my mentors to ask a question and I wouldn't get an answer back for probably 24 to 48 hours. So I had to like make a lot of decisions. And I think for me, it made me really independent and really confident in what I could and what I couldn't do. I remember a guy came in with this huge thyroid goiter and he really wanted to have this taken out. Now, it had been growing for a long time, so it probably wasn't malignant or anything like that. And I said, I wasn't in a place I could intubate people. I had no way to monitor the nerve. And I said, absolutely, I cannot operate on you because what I could do to you is much worse than what would make you better. But I did deliveries, I did C-sections, I did orthopedic injuries, I did ophthalmologic injuries for schistosomiasis, like all kinds of stuff. It was crazy.
What a way to build confidence in yourself and also in many ways, like learn how to make tough decisions, right? You make one decision and it takes away from something else, right? So
I'll share one more story with you.
Yeah.
I remember at one point, I had 4 patients who needed laparotomies. There were 2 C-sections, which was basically a laparotomy kit that needed to happen. And then there were 2 other patients who needed surgery. We just had a plane come in and I only had 2 laparotomy kits. And each of those laparotomy kits took about 12 hours minimum for them to be hand washed, dried, sterilized in the steamer, and everything like that. And so I had to make tough decisions about who am I going to operate on, who could potentially wait, and how do I optimize what I have?
Yeah, that's an amazing experience. I want to talk a little bit now about your podcast and the decision that you made to kind of start this. What was the impetus behind getting into coaching work? And you actually enrolled in a whole coaching program, right?
Yeah. So I think my impetus to get into professional development was really about my own difficulties. Like, most of us think we have potential and we can do things. And I remember as a junior attending, not getting the opportunities that I thought I should get and realizing that people weren't seeing me the same way I felt like I had my potential. And that's when I first did some professional development work and I did a leadership course and I realized how I was communicating with people and how that made a difference and how I could be more effective at demonstrating what I felt was important and working within what they felt was important too, which is super important in getting leadership opportunities, is learning how to manage up, learning how to do those things. So I started doing professional development work first and started working with them. And as part of that, they offered to train me at Weatherhead's coaching school, which is intentional change theory. And so I did that actually about 2000 and started using coaching more and more and have done professional development work. I ran a program for our interns at my former institution, and then also ran the Association of Women Surgeons coaching program. And so have been doing a lot of work primarily with trainees in terms of that, and really felt like as faculty, as attendings, as surgeons, we also need that work, and realized that there was this opportunity to help people go from kind of this frazzled, uncomfortable, unsatisfied surgeon to really this empowered, intentional surgeon, which is the person who can get what they want both inside and outside of the hospital, not like everything you want all times, but actually figures out what matters most to them and prioritizes those things and learns how to be effective at getting them.
It's so funny. I love the title, intentional surgeon. And in some ways it seems a little bit like an oxymoron. Like of course surgeons are intentional. Like you can't make a decision as a surgeon without having to be incredibly intentional. Like you have to decide to operate on someone or not. You can't really take that decision back. But I resonate with that thought a lot, because once you're now into practice, like I am for the last couple of years, you realize how little training you have in actually deciding which way you want your career to go and how to spend your time. You don't have that structure anymore of being a resident or being a fellow where you just sort of had to put your nose to the grindstone and just go. So is that sort of what you were meant by the intentional surgeon, or am I missing the point?
No, I think you've got it. What's interesting to me is I actually think our surgical training has accidentally caused us not to be as intentional. If you see presacral bleeding, you just take your hand and you put that down in the pelvis and you stop that bleeding, and then you ask for your sponge stick, right? You just react. And all the data shows that when you have like any sort of a stimulus and you have reaction, there's also this opportunity to think about things and respond. And as surgeons, although in some ways we're intentional about, is this patient ready to take to the operating room? We do these types of things. In many ways, we're taught that our response is that reaction, right? Like we do things often the same way our mentors do things. And we don't think about whether or not always that's the best or the only way to do it. We just do it. And what I actually think is that if we take that moment and that second to pause and breathe between reaction, the stimulus and the reaction, and we actually respond and we think about, what is my purpose here? What is it I want? Why do I want to be on this podcast? What do I want to promote while I'm on this podcast? What do I want people to think after listening to this? Then all of a sudden you open up your eyes to what is possible. And so many things, we do things that actually hinder what we're trying to get. We get in our own way, but we don't have to. We just need to actually take that moment, a pause, and be so much more effective in what we want to do.
And the Muslim tradition, they say that actions are by their intention. So there's this moment for sure where we can make decisions not out of just habit or an instinct, like that type 1 thinking versus that type 2 thinking. There's so many different ways you could sort of look at that sort of opportunity that we have in any given moment. But, you hinge on this tension about what we do, for example, to advance our career and our own happiness. And this has always been presented as almost dichotomous choices, where, you can either focus on your career or you can do the things that make you happy. Like residency, one thing that used to kill me was when they would come with us with these wellness initiatives and be like, oh, well, you should take up painting. And they're like, well, I barely have time to sleep or help my wife get groceries. How in the world am I now also supposed to add a hobby? Can you talk to us a little bit about this seeming dichotomy?
Yeah, I actually think it's not dichotomous, right? What happens is we're on this conveyor belt and people have told us for so long what we're supposed to be doing. And that's how you get into medical school, how you get through medical school, how you get into residency, how you get it through residency, into fellowship, through fellowship. And then all of a sudden, if you stay the academic, maybe even you think, okay, now I have to be assistant, associate professor. But at some point, you need to think about what it is. How do you want this to look? And what's interesting is the people that we see that are most successful usually have stopped like doing the everything and are doing the thing that matters to them. It's why kind of having a niche, and it doesn't have to be like an operative niche, but a niche in terms of education is my thing. I'm not going to write 50 zillion papers, or the papers I write are going to be about education. or I'm going to, like concentrate on a certain, I'm going to do colorectal cancer. Like that's where I want to do my space. I don't want to do anal rectal. I don't want to do pelvic floor. But it's by actually figuring out, and it's not just our surgical niche, it's our life niche. Like what actually matters to you? Where do I want to write a novel every time I write a note on a patient? Or am I really just about putting in the 5 lines that are going to tell me what I need to do for that patient when I go back for my preoperative, before the surgery? Like, where do I want to spend my time? How do I want to balance my time between in the hospital, outside of the hospital, and how do I make that the most effective? And there's so much data about when we are doing the things that we love, how much more effective we are at it. And everybody has to do some things they don't like, but how do we take our time and like go through literally the things you do in your day and say, these are the things I have to do. These are the things I want to do. How do I take a couple things off my have to do list and put a little more of that time into want to do list? And all of a sudden you have more energy, you have more power, you're more effective in all the different things. And you can take the time to be spending time in places and things you love, not in things you hate.
It's the piece about figuring out what you want, right? Because sometimes what you want or what you think you want may not have ever been done by people who have been around you. That's one part of it. Or there's many potential directions in which you could go. And then you're sort of standing at the crossroad, like in that Robert Frost poem, and you're trying to figure out which path to take. I suspect part of what you do with coaching is helping people to figure that out. How do you help someone figure out their purpose? Because I think that's such a critical question.
Well, let me go to that first one. You want to do something that's never been done before? Amazing. Why do we stop ourselves? When do we stop being that kid looking at the clouds saying, I'm going to like walk on clouds? It's like, why do we stop ourselves? And you're not the only one. I remember for a long time, I thought my future was going to be a division chief or do something along those lines. And I wasn't really willing to move. And there wasn't really the opportunity to do that where I was. And so I said, I can't do this because obviously if I really wanted this, I'd be willing to move. And for family reasons, that didn't make sense. And so I talked myself out of what I wanted because I couldn't make it happen because it didn't fit into a box. But we need to start thinking outside the box. I mean, think about our conversation about education here, right? We've been training people in the same way. We need to be thinking outside these boxes. And you're right. What I spend a lot of time in, and it depends who the person is and what they need, but is really getting back to your values, your strengths, and then what do you need to spend more time in your strengths? What would make you enjoy your time more? What would make it more fulfilled? And how do we make that job that doesn't exist happen? Because it's not about a title. It's about what you're doing and doing things that matter to you.
Can you maybe give us some examples of how you've helped people, or maybe even from your own experience, about shifting from the things that you kind of have to do and being more intentional about doing the things that you actually want to do?
Yeah, well, I'm going to use my own story because I have free liberty to do that. So, like I said, I thought I was going to be a division chief. I thought I was going to keep going up. And then I got to a point where my institution and I were not kind of seeing eye to eye on how things were supposed to happen. And they weren't prioritizing the things that really mattered to me. And so I stepped away from clinical medicine to change the culture of surgery. I wanted to change the culture of surgery, and I thought I'd have to do that inside medicine. But instead, like one of my big goals now is to get professional development into every residency program, right? Like how cool would it be if the ACGME or ABS had questions on communication and professional development and doing things, like if that was part of every residency program, like that's my big hairy goal now, right? So I created my own job that is going to be different from anybody else's job because like how many right colectomies or proctectomies did I need to do? If I can amplify the effect by making you a better surgeon and a better, like happier, more fulfilled surgeon, and I can do that across the country and across the, like wherever, like that has so much more effect than doing another right colectomy.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that we talk a lot about burnout and people, being really dissatisfied and unhappy with being in medicine or being surgeons and wanting to leave, which is such a shame after having spent so much time and effort in training. And not to pick on the resiliency or wellness things, because I think those are things that are important, but I also feel like it's so important that we get people to return to what really matters to them, because ultimately that's the only thing I think that's going to keep you from burning out or from just getting completely exhausted. It's like when you were a kid, you could play video games for 10 hours a day. That didn't used to bother you. The biggest thing that leads to people's burnout is doing the things that they don't enjoy or they don't want to do, or they feel like they're being forced to do it. So I couldn't agree with you more about how important this work is. It must have taken a lot of courage to just step out and do something different. Like, how did your family react to that? How did the people around you react to that? How did you get yourself through that?
Like I said, I'm not somebody who's afraid of change. Like that has never been something that really bothers me. So that's the first thing. I also recognize that I have a huge amount of privilege. I have a very supportive spouse, both financially and emotionally. And I had the privilege of having done all the things. Like I was a professor of surgery, right? I have the papers written. I've been the program director. I've been the president of Association of Women Surgeons. And I just realized that getting more titles, before I made this change, I actually interviewed for another division chief job, which was what I thought I always wanted to do. And I thought about the job. I was at a great institution and with fabulous people. And I said, you know what? My passion is no longer in figuring out how to increase somebody else's RVUs. My passion is in changing culture. And this would squash me rather than let me grow. And so I think it's because I was in tune with like what I needed and what I wanted. And I think I want to go back to one of the things you said too, that like we talk about burnout and we talk about this as like kind of separate things. I think they're the same thing. I don't think that you're responsible strictly for your burnout. Like I think there's so many institutional, professional things that we do. Before I took my break from clinical, I kind of felt like when I had a patient who I needed to take to the operating room, I literally had to put them on my back. I had to haul them through their tests. I had to fight for them to get their MRI. I had to fight for the OR time. I had to fight to get the equipment I needed in the OR time, fight to get them walking after surgery, fight to get them their stomach care, like all the things. And then what happened was when I said, you know what? My energy should be about taking care of the patient. It shouldn't be about all of these things, whether or not I can take a bleeding patient back to the operating room. So I think there's a lot of institutional things, the educational process that we need to change. And while we are waiting for those big changes to happen, we need to empower ourselves, because unless we are empowered and we take back more of our profession and more of how things happen, one, those changes aren't going to happen. And two, there are not going to be enough of us who care about taking care of people to be there when those changes actually happen. Like, I think we have to do both. And I don't think people are responsible for the fact that there's so much that causes us burnout. But I do think that as an individual, there is a lot you can control and a lot you can let go of in order to make the quality of your life better while we're waiting and enabling those changes to happen.
So, along this idea of culture, I have a couple of questions. So, first of all, I'm curious about what do you think are some of the big things in the culture in the house of surgery that need to change? And the second part of that is you intentionally kind of stepped out of surgery to be able to do that. Do you think that change can come from within, or how do we go about changing the things that we think would be better about surgery and the culture of surgery?
I definitely think we can change from within, right? And I think my issues had a lot to do with my institution and I having different ethical values and deciding that I wasn't going to be part of a system that didn't do that. And we'll see what happens. I'm hoping that I get back to some clinical, but we'll see what happens. I actually know it'll be okay either way. Like, I'd like to do clinical again, but if that happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. In terms of like, what do we need to change here? So one of the things we need to do is, and this is, gosh, so much of society right now, is that we have such a dichotomous view of how things happen. I was on a thread the other day on Facebook, and they were talking about how people can do a really bad job at a leadership position and then go to a different institution. And maybe they were really horrible and they did really bad things. And on the one hand, that needs to stop happening, where we just kind of pass around people who are dysfunctional and do that. On the other hand, we also need to figure out a way to have the space for people to grow from their mistakes and learn from their mistakes, right? Because all of us are going to make mistakes. Like, that is a guarantee. Like, none of us are perfect. We're all part of the problem and we're part of the solution. And we need to figure out a way to have the room for both of those things to happen. But I think one of the things that needs to change right now is that the power differential in surgery, there's a lot of people suffering right now, a lot of people who are just having a really hard time. And there's a power differential that is hurting our ability to grow and change. And I think diversity, which I know is one of your passions, is a big piece of that, is like thinking about different perspectives and getting different perspectives in, and realizing that there's always more than one perspective for every situation.
Maybe we're a little bit hurt by the fact that, for example, in the OR, there has to be somewhat of a hierarchy or a bit of a command structure, in the sense that when the surgeon says, well, I need this, or this is what we're going to do next, these are our priorities, then the team has to kind of rally behind that a little bit. Although one could quibble with what I just said a little bit and talk about maybe the even in the operating room, the hierarchy could be flattened in ways that would make the operating room more functional. But I think we translate some of that sense of hierarchy from the OR to the rest of the culture of surgery. How do we go about tackling an issue like that, making our hierarchies a little bit less steep?
So a couple things. First of all, we need to have the space in our lives to be able to do that, right? Like, I mean, then you go back to the whole burnout question. Most surgeons are running at 120%, right? And so how do you make it more effective so that you do have the space to think about these things and to really do things? One of the things I actually realized when I stepped back from clinical is that I have this time to think about things in ways that I wasn't doing when I was still clinical. I mean, yes, I thought about my patients and I thought about taking the best care of them and doing things like that, but to really like ponder and to read and to listen to podcasts like your podcast and all of those types of things. I think that's one thing, is that we have to realize that we are not our RVU targets, and that there is value in surgeons that is not at all represented by RVUs and what is going on. So I think that's one of the things we need to do. And some of that, again, comes back to what we can do. The other thing I would say is that, to me, perspective is so important. We need to get more different perspectives at the table. And, over the last 4 years, increasing diversity in lots of different ways has done that. But I think a lot of times we do that for what the photograph looks like. And it's important, right? Because if you need to see one to be one, and that is important. I don't want to downplay that. But I think the most important part of diversity is perspective, right? If I have a medical student that's late to round every day or to do their pre-rounding and things like that, and I'm like, well, why aren't you here? And they're like, well, the bus doesn't run for me to get here in time. That's a perspective I might not have, and I need that perspective. So if we don't have different people who have different learned experiences at the table when we're talking about things, right? There's so much data that you could watch a car accident. You and I could see the same car accident and have different ideas of what happened based on our viewpoint, our angle. We need to have all those perspectives. And what happens is that, to a large extent, because of that hierarchy, we're only hearing the perspective through what was, and not the perspective of like our younger generations of what could be. Like, how can gaming change surgical education? How could it change our ability to get patients to our office and take better care of them? How could we optimize things so my patients don't call me up and say, how come I can't see you for a month and a half, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We are obsessed on the podcast with trying to understand how we can bring more diversity into surgery. Do you think it's just a matter of getting those perspectives at the table? You still see all these really kind of sobering statistics about the pay gap in medicine. You see all these very sobering statistics about underrepresentation of minorities and women in surgery, especially at the upper ends of leadership. Do you think that's just a matter of getting those people at the table? Or how else can we be more intentional about making sure that that diversity that we want in surgery exists?
I think if we realize that this isn't a one way to do surgery, one way to be successful, we would change a lot. So, for instance, like how do you increase diversity? Well, maybe we increase flexibility in a lot of different ways, in job sharing, in the opportunities to like not have RVUs be everything, to say, yeah, education or research is going to be a bigger part of your time. I mean, one of the issues that comes back to is like money, money, money. And the fact is we all get paid reasonable salaries, right? Like if we decreased what everyone across the board got paid some, and we had more opportunities for parental leave, we had more opportunities for FMLA, for all different types of things. Like there's so many pieces that we could just do, but because I've worked really hard to make this salary and there's no way I'm going to take a decrease in what I get paid, like we need to stop thinking like that and think about what do we want surgery to look like and what would actually enable it to look that way. We think about how do we rearrange the furniture, not how would we build this if we started in a different place.
You touched on this a few times about one of the things that you would want for trainees is a bit of a focus on professional development. And you've also talked a lot about how we often don't focus on the things perhaps outside of the OR that can help advance our career. What are some of the things, some of the qualities that you think surgeons should be learning that they're not getting a good training in during their residency program or during their fellowship?
Such a great question. Number one, they need to understand what their own values and their own strengths are. When I did this professional development program with my residents, one of the residents' value was like investigation, or a strength was investigation. And they were like, how does that have anything to do with surgery, right? Like, what does that have to like? And I was like, okay, let me ask you a question. For the rest of the group, when you get told that there's somebody coming in and we don't have any of the paperwork, it's, from outside hospital, right? And we don't have any of the paperwork. And I say, listen, I need you to hunt down all that paperwork. How is that for you? And they're like, well, I'll do it. It's my job. Like I have to do it. That person loves to do that, right? So if we start working, like we need to understand what our own strengths are so that maybe that's a job that I'm actually going to get really into and I'm going to have like a great, like I'll know what happened to that patient because I'm spending a little bit more time doing that. Not that we don't need to learn how to cross-train and do everything, but maybe like you go figure out, talk to IR because you're a people person and you can get that drain placed. And I'm going to spend the time, doing that. And we both enjoy our day a lot more, right? So knowing your own strengths, knowing your own values, so you know what to prioritize and do more of. Communication. So we don't realize that there are different communication styles. Just recently, I was coaching somebody and they are all about the why. And this person would continue to explain to you why you should do whatever, needs to happen. It's like explaining to an anti-vaxxer with the whys of vaccination during COVID. Like that's not what's going to motivate them, right? In most cases, like you need to realize that some people are about the who and some people are about the what and some people are about the hows, and not all people are whys or hows or whats or whos. So if we learned how to communicate with each other, we would then all of a sudden, I call you up in the middle of the night, I can tell you, Dr. Fruit, you need to get to the operating room because I have a patient bleeding. Like that's maybe what you need to know if you're a what, right? And then you'll hear the details. So communication. Negotiation. We need to learn how to have empathy for each other's position. We need to learn how my problem can be solved at the same time as I'm solving your problem. And it can truly be a win-win, right? Like those are things that in every conversation we need to to be able to manage. We need to learn how the empathy is a really important part. And I also think that one of the things we need to learn how to do is to evaluate different situations and take that pause, right? We need to learn how our emotions play and why they play a role in what we're doing, and how we can use our emotions, not just get rid of them, but use them in a productive way to get what it is where we need to go. And you can say, okay, all of this, like, that's a lot of hooey. It's a lot of like, really soft skills, blah, blah, blah. Talk to any program director, talk to any chair of surgery, and ask them what they spend most of their time dealing with. It's interpersonal communication, it's teamwork, it's disruptive physicians, right? It's probably about 80% of any of those jobs. If you take away maybe the finances for the chair, 80% of their people job is about those things. It's not about your technical expertise. It's not about your clinical acumen. It's about how you deal with other people and how we all get on the same page so we can all work together.
I think an important point here is that these things can be taught. Like, it's not something that...
It's not magic.
No, and it's not something that someone's born with and other people aren't. It's something that people like you can coach, and that people, that everyone can learn.
Can I add something to that too? I think one of the thoughts I've had recently is a lot about like mentoring versus coaching, because one of the problems with people accepting coaching right now is that they think it's the same as mentoring. So when I have a mentor, even the best mentor, and I've had some fabulous mentors, and everybody needs mentors. The fact of the matter is that this is a gift that I'm giving you, and it's something that some people are better at than others. I'm generally talking as a mentor from my own experience, whether that's with myself, my residents, but my own experience, what worked for me. And oftentimes as mentors, we want to create little mini me's, right? Like so many people, like if you want to go into colorectal surgery, yeah, I want to be your mentor. You want to go into trauma surgery? Let me go give you somewhere. It's not about creating a mini you. The difference between coaching and mentoring is that I do have experience in these skills, right? And training in these skills. I have been trained at how this is all about you. And it's a gift you can give to yourself, where like you actually have time for somebody to pre-game your talk with your boss about whether or not you're going to get a raise this year, to talk about why you're having difficulties with that staff member in the operating room. Like, why am I always in conflict here? To like really think about that and to call you out on the things that need to be shown to you in a way that I'm not your friend, right? I'm not your buddy. I'm not the senior author on your paper. I am here just for you to get to your goals and to optimize the way you're dealing with things. The other thing that we don't realize is that like coaching is like a new thing. We've had, and one of my mentors told me this, we've had like our whole lives to think about what the cost of a car is, right? If you said, I want to buy that car for $5, everyone would just laugh at you, right? Or a vacation. But nobody's talked to you because and I was in academic surgery. This should all come free. This should all come like without any price. Like I should just do this. But this is really like an investment in yourself. And I'm not there are a zillion coaches out there. This is not to create business, but I think people don't understand like the investment in themselves that this is. It's like a personal trainer for your brain.
Yeah, it's like, we would be shocked if a professional athlete didn't have a coach.
Which is, right?
Yeah, coach is, right? A coach for their sleep, a coach for their own dietitian, a coach for whatever part of their game, a running coach, or a very specific coaches for each aspect of their game. And yet we just go out into the wild, wild west and hope for the best. So yeah, it's wild. And I often feel like for trainees, not to belabor this point, but I often feel like for trainees, we need more of that kind of coaching model as well too. It can't be one size fits all. It's really about like looking at the individual person in front of you and figuring out, well, how can we optimize your learning style? Where can folks find you if they want to get more coaching or they want to learn more about the work that you do?
First of all, I'm really accessible. I love taking care of surgeons. I'm going to work on changing the culture of surgery, and I spend all my time doing this. So my website is www.theintentionalsurgeon.com. You can also find the podcast, which is on Apple or Spotify and things like that. Or they can actually reach out and they can email me. So I'll give you my email address and you can put it in your show notes and stuff. It's SL Stein Coaching. So Sam Larry Stein Coaching at gmail.com.
This has been such a fabulous conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. One of the questions we ask all of our guests is, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice as a chief resident, what would that advice be?
I think that advice would be to spend some time figuring out what my goals are and to figure out how to make my goals come true. Spend less time worrying about what the path is supposed to be and more time thinking about what I want my path to be. Yes, you need to get settled a little clinically, and it doesn't have to be the first thing that you need to do. But I think part of our generalized dissatisfaction with what we're doing has a lot to do with the fact that we're not spending the time doing the things we want to do. And it's not about how much money you make. It's not about how many papers you write or how many mentees you have. It's really about finding your space so that you can love taking care of patients, you can love your job, and you can spend your energy on doing the things that matter to you rather than doing all the other things.
You've been listening to Cold Steel, the official podcast of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. If you have comments or questions, please email us at podcast.cjs@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.